So I've created this beginner drafting repository for teaching people some basics of Fulcro internally at my company. And I thought I'd share a few things here. It's a public repository, you can grab it. And the thing that I've done about it, and I did have to tweak a couple of little bugs I found in the Clojure side of Fulcro. Everything in Fulcro, Rad, etc. is CLJC. So you can actually play with a lot in Fulcro and Clojure. I've said this in other videos, but I refined this even further just so that I could help people just think about the data and stop concentrating too much on the UI. So I've set this project up where if you start just a regular Clojure REPL, and you don't have anything special going here on that REPL, and then you go to, for example, the app form namespace. I've made it so that when you create an application here in Clojure, it replaces the render function with one that either will output essentially hiccup, which is what this function converts the elements to, or it'll print the tree of data that's coming from the root component. So you can either set it based on this atom, which you can pass in, whether or not it's printing the tree of props for the application or what looks like hiccup for the application. And then for the remote, I set up a mock HTTP remote that's hooked to an EQL processor, so you can write all of your server-side code in Clojure and your client-side mutations in Clojure, and these then have access to a DataScript database, which, where's the database? Is in this app server's registry namespace. So I'm just using a DataScript. Oh, sorry, that's the helpers. Sorry, that's the helpers. Oh, the form APIs namespace. Here we go. The forms APIs uses the apps APIs database, which is just a DataScript thing that's got some, the refs in many cardinalities set up as schema, and otherwise you don't need schema. And then some helper functions like create an entity, right? So temp ID and give back the ID that was assigned, check to see if something exists in the database, those kinds of things. So you can just kind of write everything either all for a browser or all for a REPL. And in fact, this works both in the browser and in the REPL. It's just you would use a different client startup, the client namespace here mounts this right in CLJS. It doesn't override the render, so you still get to use the mock HTTP server, which would run in the browser with the database in the browser, and in CLJ it uses CLJ rendering. So anyway, I'll show you the final result of this, just so if you wanted to play with this as a way to learn, you could. So over here in this form namespace, and I've done some changes here that aren't on the repository that you could use as sort of like exercises for yourself if you start with the repository. It's down here basically, and this is a little out of order. Once you've loaded the namespace, you can mount the app, and it will start by rendering. In this case, it rendered the hiccup of root. So if I go look at root renders a div, and then when there's a person, it renders the person. There was no person, so I just got a div. So if I go down here and I change this to render data true, and then schedule a render here, I tell it to force re-rendering, then I see the props are empty, right? The root props are empty. So if I come down here and merge a person component, and this person component has a nested car component, right, for fields cars. So if I come here and I merge a person that has two cars, and I tell it to add the form config, which is what I should do if it's going to be a form, and then I tell it to join it to the root person edge, right, root person edge, which is where I want the person, then bam, I get the tree of props here, and you can see it denormalized root person, car, and then the form state config that goes with car, the form state, and then if I go and look at the actual app state, here, right? So this is the normalized database. I'll see that car has a pointer to the forms by ident. This is the form config. I'm sorry, this is the form config, and this is the ident of that form config data. And notice the ID is a map, which is kind of an unusual thing, but it's something I did. And IDs can be any data type. They can be UIDs or integers. They can be maps. They can be whatever. And I didn't want to put an ident here, although that's really what I want, right? It's the forms by ident for car 5. But if I put the ident car 5 here, it sort of looks like you're trying to point at the car itself, whereas really I'm pointing at this form by ident with this kind of alternate form of an ID. And so up here the table for form config, forms by ident has these as IDs. So it bends your eyes just a little bit, but once you're used to it, it's fine. Now the nifty thing about this is I've set it up so that if you look at the UI, let's go back to rendering data false, schedule a render. All right, so now we're seeing the DOM here, and I made it so that in Clojure it emits the transaction that would be run. So let's say I change the first name of the person, right? And so I can see form save would have a delta of person 1, first name used to be nothing, and now it's this. And I can actually click on the button with ID save. What this does is it renders the hiccup, finds the save element, finds this transaction, and runs it, right? It's really pretty straightforward, right? In Clojure, render the app and give me back the element with that ID. So basically the root factory, turn it into hiccup, then find the hiccup element by ID, and then extract the onClick, which is going to be a string, change the quotes to quotes, the HTML entities from the HTML to literal quotes, so I could do a read string on it and then run the transaction. So I can say click on save, and I've got a little built-in fake delay on my server, so it pretends to take a second, and so it says, oh, well, I'm saving person 1, changing first name from nothing to Tony. And then I come back and I see, oh, well, now the form is clean, etc. And the save is now empty. So anyway, this is the way you can just sort of play with pretty much anything in Fulcro, forms, routing, whatever, and either watch the data or watch the DOM and sort of play with it. You could do unit testing with this, right? You could swap this renderer out, make sure it's synchronous, write a unit test for some element of your UI, and play away. So anyway, I thought this might be useful, and